John, you gotta stand up.
Okay, Father.
You're gonna be able to hear him, Father, even if he's standing down. Okay, I'll point this one out.
That's like a podcast.
Yeah.
Something like that. This is more of a Godcast.
Okay.
Somebody help me.
All right. Well, good morning. My name is Reader John, and I'll be presenting a devotion this morning. My devotion today is going to be about Saint Raphael, Bishop of Brooklyn. Saint Raphael is one of the most beloved saints of our Holy Archdiocese, but he wasn't under the Antiochian Patriarchate when he was in America. He's beloved by the Russians, yet was Syrian by birth. He was venerated as a holy man even among the Roman Catholic Mexicans because his holiness was so evident. Saint Raphael was beloved by all in his earthly life and is a true icon to the unity of the Church, regardless of which local church you belong to, what language you speak, what country you hail from, and what race you are. His story begins back in July 9th, 1860. The Muslims in Damascus attacked the Christians in the Christian quarter, with the goal being to slaughter as many as possible. The slaughter lasted 3 days. Several hundred were burned to death in the Holy Dormition Cathedral. If they tried to escape, they were pushed back in. All of the principal churches were burned. Several hundred women were driven through the streets and sold to Bedouins for a few shillings each. The Turkish police force, rather than assisting them, assisted the Muslim populace in gunning down the Christians. 2,500 Orthodox men, not including women and children, were slain. The holy parish priest of the Holy Dormition Cathedral there, and the spiritual father of the Hawawini family, St. Joseph of Damascus, who we just commemorated actually last Wednesday, was martyred. I would invite you to read his life, actually, because when this was all going on, he took the Eucharist with him, ran, jumping rooftop to rooftop to commune those who were sick and old, who were unable to flee. He was finally caught and martyred with axes. The Hawawini family was among those able to flee and went to Beirut. There, not long after, Saint Raphael was born on November 8th, 1860. He was baptized on Theophany, January 6th, 1861. His family returned shortly after to Damascus, though others fled to other countries. His family, before the attack, were well-to-do middle class, but now they couldn't afford formal education for Saint Raphael. But through prayers and God's providence, he was supported by donors. In 1874, at the age of 13, he became a reader. He then became a teacher's assistant at 17 years old. He became a permanent teacher of Arabic and Turkish a year later in 1878, and in 1879 he was made a monk and became Patriarch Erotheosis Angelos, or assistant attendant. He managed to convince the Patriarch to let him continue his studies in Halki at the Ecumenical Patriarchate School of Theology, though he was told if he goes, he must support himself financially. He was unable to go to the local Balaman school because it had been closed since 1840. By God's providence, yet again, he was supported by donors and was able to study at the school of Halki. While in school, he voiced opposition to the appointment of Bishop Gerasimos to the Antiochian Patriarchate because he knew that Antioch should be led by one of her own. This had been an issue for some time, where the FENAR, the Ecumenical Patriarchate, was using his influence to bring Greek bishops over into the Antiochian See to make them patriarch, rather than the local Arabs becoming elected as patriarch by their Holy Synod. He was threatened for doing this with being dismissed from school, and so he stopped voicing his protests. He knew that if he was unable to study, he wouldn't be able to plead his people's cause. He was ordained a deacon in 1885 at the age of 24, and in 1886 he received a cert of theology in the first degree, granting him the title Master of Theology. He then became an itinerant preacher under Patriarch Gerasimos and taught at a theological school that patriarch had founded. In 1888, Patriarch Gerasimos gave a blessing for Saint Raphael to petition the Holy Russian Synod to allow him to study at the Kiev Theological School. He was approved, and because he didn't yet speak Russian, he took his exams in Greek. Before his finals in 1889, he was tasked with becoming the vicar for Antioch to Russia. This position functioned as kind of an ambassador from the Antiochian See to the Russians. He was approved, and because he didn't yet speak, okay, sorry. He was received into this position and was elevated to priest and then archimandrite in 1889 at the age of 28. Russia had an interest in the Antiochian affairs. Russia has had a history of donating money to Antiochian monasteries and churches, as well as churches on Mount Athos, to support them while they were under Ottoman occupation, to pay the jizya tax so that they could keep their churches and their monasteries open and functioning. The Matokian that Saint Raphael was tasked with running in Russia was 65,000 rubles in debt upon starting. He started right away working on this, and through fundraising was able to pay off 20% in the first 2 years. He also used his position to the advantage of his countrymen. He opened the door for 25 Arab men to go to Russian theological schools. There weren't many theological schools in Antioch, and so this allowed his people to get the theological education that they needed to serve their people. After 2 years, Patriarch Gerasimos resigned to become Patriarch of Jerusalem. Saint Raphael began to write letters. He used this opportunity to write letters to the Antiochian metropolitans, to influential laymen, to try to get support for an Arab to become the patriarch, rather than someone who was foreign, who couldn't minister to the people as well as someone who was of the people. He wrote newspaper articles. He swayed many. He made lots of friends in this. He also, unfortunately, made a lot of enemies. When the time came, there were 3 Arab candidates who were put forth to the Holy Synod of Antioch, and 2 candidates were put forward favored by the Fanar. The Fanar is the ecumenical patriarchate, if you don't know. When it appeared that an Arab would be chosen, those who were opposed promised to donate and were successful in their bribery. The candidate elected was not one of the Arabs, and this candidate had even offered 10,000 lina to notable people in Damascus for the position of patriarch. His name was Patriarch Spiridon. Saint Raphael refused to acknowledge him as patriarch and called him a simoniac publicly because he paid for his position, like Simon in the New Testament. He ceased to commemorate him in the liturgy. He was threatened with ecclesiastical discipline if he did not stop, and if he would not stop commemorating and writing against him. Rather than be removed from his position, he wanted to help his countrymen. And rather than going against the counseling of his conscience and commemorating the simoniac, he chose instead to cease performing the divine liturgy altogether so that he wouldn't have to violate his conscience. He was aware that Patriarch Spiridon wanted to remove him and install a Greek who was loyal to him in his stead, and so he petitioned the Russian Synod to rule that only an Arab could have the Antiochian vicar to the Russian Synod. But he finally had to give over control, and so he did, to the Russian Superior General of all monasteries. He continued to publicly argue for the return of the Antiochian See to the Arabs, now that he wasn't in that position anymore. In 1893, he wrote a book under a pen name called A Historical Look at the Brotherhood of the Holy Sepulchre. He uncovered the group's control over the Jerusalem Patriarchate and their growing influence over the Antiochian See, as well as the lavish lives the monks lived. Because of this, false accusations were made against him, but the Holy Russian Synod defended him publicly. Because of this, he was suspended from doing services. At the advice of one of his friends, Vladimir Sabler, assistant to the Imperial Secretary of State of Russia, he apologized to Patriarch Spiridon. He was forgiven and no longer suspended, and was allowed to stay in Russia. He began to teach in 1893 Arabic and anti-Islam polemic at the Kazan Theological Academy. He was forbidden from being in Moscow or major cities in Russia at this point because of his writings and his opposition. Patriarch Spiridon, Saint Raphael was canonically released at his request to the Church of to the Russian Holy Church. In 1895, he received his request to serve as priest to the Orthodox Syrian community by the Syrian Orthodox Benevolent Society in New York. New York was the center of Orthodox Syrians. Previously, one priest had come, but he had to leave because he couldn't be financially supported. The next priest who came to serve that community was a Ecumenist and was kicked out of the country. In 1895, the Benevolent Society was officially organized under the president, Dr. Ibrahim Arbili. Its first task was to set up a church and to support a priest. When Saint Raphael had received the letter, he wrote back to them and explained to them that because he's a priest under the Russian Synod, they would be also underneath the Russian Patriarchate if he came to serve them. And the community agreed that this was amenable. And so Saint Raphael received a blessing to go and a stipend from Russia after meeting Bishop Nicholas, who was the supervising hierarch of Russia's North America mission. Before he left, Saint Raphael gathered as many liturgical items as he possibly could. He arrived in New York in November 1895 and celebrated Divine Liturgy just 3 days later. He set up a chapel on the second floor of 77 Washington Street in Lower Manhattan. Saint Raphael assisted Bishop Nicholas in dedicating the chapel and placing it in the Syrian Orthodox community under the patronage of Saint Nicholas of Myr and Lycia, who was the patron saint of the Tsar, Saint Nicholas II. It's worth noting, too, that the Tsar was most supportive of Saint Raphael's work. Saint Raphael moved closer to his people, which was on the other side of the river. He started to live at 120 Pacific Street on the other side of the river. Fortunately, I don't know too much about that area, but it sounds like it wasn't a very nice area. But he chose to live there anyway because that's where his people were. His faithful loved him for his love, his devotion, his sincerity, and his piety. Before too long, Saint Raphael heard of a smaller Arab Orthodox community. Saint Raphael and the vice president of the community, Abdul Lufti, visited 30 cities in a straight line from New York to San Francisco in 1896 to visit all the small communities that they could. They stayed nowhere longer than 4 days, and often less than 24 hours. In all these visits, he performed the mysteries, divine liturgies. He presented fiery homilies to inspire hope and courage in the people who were despairing. He gave communion, and everywhere the community greeted him as Christ himself. He helped bring Father John Bacchus, who was visiting his children in the U.S., under Bishop Nicholas, and founded a mission and placed Father John there. He did what he could to establish missions and to bring priests to the country because the people were, unfortunately, they were turning to other churches because there just simply were no Orthodox churches or priests around them. In 1898, Saint Raphael created what's called the 5-Pounder, and it's the large liturgical book that you'll find in the bookstore. It was later translated by Father Seraphim Nazar, but its purpose was that the priests in the new world would be able to perform the services. Initially, Saint Raphael wrote it in Arabic, but Father Seraphim Nazar was able to translate it later for us. He served on the editorial committee to review all Orthodox publications in America with St. Alexis Toth and St. John Kocherov. He received 3 awards from Russia, 1 from St. Nicholas himself, and in 1898 he undertook his secondary missionary journey. He went to New England, he went to the Midwest, he went to the South and the Southwest of the country. He toured everywhere. It became clear to him that more priests were required, and so he requested Bishop Nicholas for more priests. He was given a blessing to search for candidates on his journeys. In 1899, St. Tikhon replaced Bishop Nicholas. St. Tikhon moved the diocesan see from San Francisco to New York and gave Alaska a vicariate so that they wouldn't be without a bishop. And this was the auxiliary bishop, Innocent Pustinsky. St. Tikhon had an interesting idea for how to handle the diocese in America. So rather than do it geographically, because as he wrote to the Synod, America is kind of a unique case. The New World's unique. It's not like the Old World. What he wanted to do was establish ethnic dioceses. So he wanted a Syrian, he wanted a Greek, he wanted a Serbian, Russian. He wanted all of these different hierarchs to serve as auxiliary bishops, and bishops who function mostly autonomously underneath the Russian Church. Serving the faithful of that particular nationality, ethnicity. That was his plan. This was something that Saint Raphael approved. As time went on, Antioch saw the promise and all of the good work that Saint Raphael was doing, and so they tried to pull him back to the Middle East to be a bishop there. He refused, though, stating that his work was not yet complete in America. In 1902, he went on a missionary trip to Mexico. He sought those who couldn't come to see him, who didn't come to see him. He looked everywhere for more people that he could mission to while he was in each location. He was told there that Mexico was a ripe missionary field, but he couldn't spend much time there. He was only one man. Later, though, because of his efforts, there was a church established there in Mexico. I think exists to this day. It was recently established. Soon after this missionary journey, the first permanent church for the Arab Orthodox in New York in 1902 was established. And shortly thereafter, in 1904, he was made bishop. He was the first person to be elevated to the bishopric in the U.S. To instruct the faithful, Saint Raphael established the magazine called The Word to teach the faithful and to give them the news from the church. He saw that it was very important to minister to the youth because most of the youth were growing up learning English, and because the services were all in Arabic, they were leaving the faith. They saw it as something that wasn't anything to do with them, and they were in the New World after all. Saint Raphael advocated the use of English in the church services. He would write at least one article in the Word in English. And in 1912, he became ill. He was sent to rest in New York, and as soon as he could hear confessions, he visited the community, even though he was still really unfit to do so. After his, quote, rest, he went on to another journey. He went to Massachusetts, West Virginia, Washington, D.C., Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, Alabama. And then after that, he, not too much longer, went to New England, Montreal, Toronto, Michigan, Indiana, Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, and Ohio. After that journey, he was completely exhausted, and unfortunately, he reposed very soon after, in the year of 1915. That's the life of Saint Raphael. Does anybody have any questions or anything to discuss?
I have a question.
Yes.
This might be a better question if the Father allows.
Sure.
You might know.
Sure.
You know, it said that it was the Orthodox Syrian Church. So when did it change its name to the Antiochian Orthodox Church, or was it always that?
Do you know that, Father?
The name changed from the Orthodox Syrian Church to the Ethiopian Church.
It wasn't during this time. That's why we still have the organization, youth organization called SOYA, which stands for Syrian Orthodox Youth. And then it changed into something else. But I'm not sure. But for sure, it was not during this time.
But before that, it was called the Syrian Orthodox
Yes,
Church?
yeah, because the Russians, that's their focus on. You reach out to a particular nationality and you establish dioceses under the Russian jurisdiction. The Tsar. Just about every church in America was supported by the Tsar, funded by the Tsar. So, despite any current jurisdiction, it went on. And this is one of the reasons that the Russian church in America, after the revolution, if you want to call it a good revolution, after the revolution, changed the name. So it's no longer, and went under the Orthodox Church of America. In order to change the Constitution so the communist regime will not come over here and says, okay, we want to confiscate everything. Everything belongs to us, to the state. So that's why they changed the name. But I can't answer that question. But my gut feeling, it remained the Syrian Orthodox Church until passes that.
Until what?
Past his death. The parish I was serving in Pennsylvania under the name of St. Elias, Newcastle, Pennsylvania, it was established by Saint Raphael,
Yeah, I think he established 30 churches.
as well as St. George Cathedral in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
You said it was Saint Tikhon who was in favor of basically the kind of ecclesiastical structure we have in America, and Saint Raphael was a proponent of that, or is what we have now not really the image that they had?
It's not really the image now. So before, everybody would have been under the Russian church. It still would have been centralized. So you have these auxiliary bishops over different ethnicities.
So Russia would be at the top, but then the other jurisdictions would still operate, but ultimately report back, kind of thing?
Correct.
They were not really jurisdictions at that time. They were just a subdivision or diocese of the Russian Orthodox Church.
Okay. So it was the Russian church, but they would split within themselves based off of ethnicity then?
That was his
Based
idea.
on ethnic language.
Yeah.
The language was very important. It was a natural thing to say. To reach people in their own language would be very important, especially those that don't speak English very well. Saint Raphael is the first one that advocated for the use of the English language, and I think declared it as the official language of the Archdiocese.
Richard, no.
Yes.
With part of that plan, I was curious, was that kind of on route to getting any sort of like American autocephalous church, not necessarily what we see now, but was it kind of like, Russia for now, but then eventually once the population, obviously he was a proponent of English, so he was forward thinking in that regard. I'm just curious if you came across anything that kind of indicated that was the direction that he saw for the future.
Yeah, the book didn't cover on that. Maybe in St. Tikhon's writings you'd find that. I would imagine eventually it would get there. But in this time period, you're looking at like one bishop for the Western Hemisphere. So we're not, we're better off now, but still have a long way to go. So yeah, nothing in the book, unfortunately, on that. Thank you. Yes.
First of all, kudos for taking the time and the effort to read the book and to convey to us the most important findings that you had. I have a comment and then I have a question.
Okay.
So my comment is, I'm reading now, rereading the Acts of the Apostles.
Okay.
Can you stand up and speak up, because we're not here, at least I'm not here.
Oh yes, of course. Can you hear me now? Yes. So I'm rereading now the. Yes. So, brethren, I'm rereading now the Acts of the Apostles and the letters that Saint Paul sent, and I cannot but make, let's say, I see parallels with what Saint Paul did with the early Christian communities, and how the fundamental role that he played in establishing the church as we know now, and Saint Raphael's ministries and reaching out. And in the old country they say one bird does not make a spring. And sometimes it does. Sometimes one person makes the example that other people follow. So that's just my humble contribution to what you did. And now the second question is, can you tell me something more about the tension between Fana, the Greek-dominated elite, Orthodox elite in Istanbul, and the Arab clergy? Because I come from the Balkans, so traditionally connected with the Bulgarian Orthodox Church, and they had a similar tension. They had a Slavic day, and then at one point in the Middle Ages, supported by the same Curious and Methodius, they introduced the Slavic language as a liturgical language. Until then, it was only, I think, Hebrew, Greek and Latin. So is this something similar? Did Saint Raphael play something similar to the Arab people, to the Middle East people, like Cyril Methodius did in the Balkans for the Slavs? Thank you very much.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know when the Fenar started interfering with the affairs of the Holy Synod in Antioch, but I can say that, you know, after reading this book, Saint Raphael was certainly a defender of the local people ruling themselves, because who can minister to an Arab best? An Arab, you know, people of that culture who understand the people and speak the language. So he was definitely a champion for that. So, yes.
All right, if that is
All right,
all we
thank you.
have, thank you so much, Reader John.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it.